In the Middle Ages, King Henry sat on his throne in the highest chamber of the stone castle, surrounded by walls, rising behind misty mountains. He was a middle-aged, intelligent, agile, tall, broad-shouldered ruler. He had emerged victorious from every battle he had fought. Yet despite all his power, he was quite emotional and compassionate. No matter what, he continued to mourn the death of his wife, Queen Anna. Every morning, before greeting his knights, King Henry would water the daffodils Queen Anna had planted in the castle garden. With each watering, the scent of daffodils would remind him of his wife. He would then hold a meeting with his vizier, after which he would take his daughter Moana with him to Queen Anna's grave to pay their respects. They never neglected to water the daffodils at the grave. Waking up to another such day, King Henry prepared for his duties, while his most trusted knight, Jack, opened his eyes as usual in the early hours of the morning. As the sunlight streamed through the window into his room, he got out of bed and began another exhausting day. After washing his face with cold water, he ate his usual simple breakfast of dark bread, cheese, a few olives, and hot barley porridge. For him, endurance was more important than show. When he donned his armor, the weight of the steel settled on his shoulders, and his face was filled with pride. He felt a confidence as if he were going to war and would emerge victorious. He stood before the mirror, looked at his steel armor, closed his eyes, and felt a sense of pride as if he were going to war and would win, and that this victory would be thanks to him. He imagined himself as the commander-in-chief, but this fantasy was short-lived. He remembered that he had to go down to the courtyard and greet the king along with the other knights. He fastened his sword to his belt and got ready. When he went down to the courtyard, the knights had already gathered. Jack gave them all a brief salute and fell into line. As the trumpet sounded, King Henry descended the stone steps. His shining armor and golden crown dazzled the knights. They admired the king's sharp and stern gaze. As always, Clovis, his right-hand man and vizier, was by his side. Clovis, a man with a thin face and sharp eyes, was the king's most loyal man. He always enriched the king's mind with accurate information, but he also envied the king's trust and affection for the knight Jack. Clovis lined up the knights, preparing them to greet the king and declared that they were at the disposal of His Majesty's army. King Henry stepped before the army and stated his usual words, that the power of the kingdom lay not only in the sword, but also in the mind, and he completed the morning salute. Then they went to the planning room with Clovis. Clovis began to recount the recent developments in detail. He said that a group of soldiers coming from the enemy castle and circling around its perimeter, seemingly conducting reconnaissance, had caught their attention. Before he could finish his sentence, King Henry reminded him that many enemies had attempted to conquer the castle using this tactic, but they had always been victorious. Clovis said in a worried tone that this enemy army seemed larger and better prepared than usual. King Henry then shrugged his shoulders and stated that the greatest victory in war was to defeat the enemy without breaking their resistance. He said he understood the concern, but that their armor and soldiers were ready at any moment. He also concluded the meeting by saying that worry would not eliminate the negatives, but rather increase the possibility of them happening. After the meeting, as he did every morning, he told Clovis to prepare the horse-drawn carriage to take Moana to Queen Anna's grave, and they set off. Meanwhile, Jack had withdrawn to his room, And as he thought about the day's plan, Princess Moana came to mind. The moment he entered the castle, he saw Moana and was captivated by her. Her brown eyes, long auburn hair, and sweet freckles on her face had enchanted Jack. Thinking of her, the love inside him overwhelmed and overshadowed all his other thoughts. Even when he tried to pull himself together, he couldn't stop dreaming about Moana. However, thinking that she was the king's daughter and that she must never lose the trust the king had in her, she decided to keep these feelings to herself. But every night she went to bed and woke up with this distress. As he left the room and walked down the hallway, he heard voices from the floor below. Looking down the stairs, he saw that it was King Henry and Moana. Moana was wearing an elegant dress and was as beautiful as ever. Jack excitedly greeted His Majesty and the princess. Moana responded kindly. For Jack, time seemed to stand still in that moment. His heart raced, his eyes sharpened, and he felt a spark between him and Moana. However, he did not forget King Henry's discipline and devotion to his daughter. King Henry said that the vizier had mentioned the commotion around the castle and stated that Jack would be in charge of the castle's security that night. He made it clear that he couldn't give this task to anyone else and that he trusted him. Hearing these words, Jack was enchanted and felt that pride he had felt that morning again, because he heard clearly that both the king and Henry, the father of the girl he loved, trusted him. He knelt down, respectfully saluted, accepted the order, and stood up. King Henry smiled and went upstairs with his daughter. Meanwhile, Clovis had heard what was happening downstairs and was angry that the task had been given to Jack. His jealousy had subsided recently, but it had flared up again after hearing these words. As he went upstairs, Jack gave him a sincere greeting, but Clovis did not respond and headed for the king's room. Jack didn't care because he was so happy that nothing else mattered. As the vizier approached the king's chamber, a plan came to mind. He had been annoyed with Jack from the start and wouldn't let it go. He thought about keeping watch beside him that night. He would go and ask the king about this idea as if he had no idea. He knew the king would be pleased and that it would get him in his good graces, but this watch would not be such a simple watch after all. He knocked on the door and asked permission to enter. King Henry said he had been thinking of summoning him and allowed him to come in. Princess Moana was also in the room. Even though the king had given permission, Clovis asked the princess for permission too, even though the king had already allowed it. He did this just to curry favor. But Moana was a sharp girl. Even though she didn't understand this unnecessary question and sincerity, she gave her permission. King Henry explained that Jack would be in charge of the watch that night and said they could sleep peacefully. Clovis's face fell as he suggested that one person might not be enough and that he could stay on watch with Jack. The king welcomed this idea and said he was pleased, adding that he would never look back. Clovis said he accepted the order and left the room. Moana felt a sense of treachery, but she didn't dislike Jack either. Turning to her father, she asked why he would allow such a thing, pointing out that Jack would feel bad in this situation and that only he could do the job. Henry, however, said that this is how things work, that decisions are made based solely on what is safe and sound regardless of people's feelings, and that if he considered everyone's feelings, he wouldn't be able to please anyone, but that they're getting along well would make him proud. Moana said her father knew best and left the room. As she walked out the door, she noticed Jack coming down the stairs. She waited for him to descend, then walked toward him. Jack was returning from military training and looked quite tired. When he saw Moana in front of him, his face lit up and all his fatigue seemed to vanish. Moana asked if he was upset about her father's decision. She said her father was pleased with the vizier's offer of help and that he loved peace and harmony. Jack was so excited that he couldn't quite understand what was being said. He was lost in Moana's eyes and couldn't make sense of what she was saying. Moana recounted everything that had happened. As Moana spoke, Jack's heart was still beating fast and he was sweating more and more. Jack wasn't very surprised by this situation because he knew the vizier's thoughts and jealousy, but he thought everyone was like him and always bowed to it. He told the princess that whatever the king said was right, that they respected his decision, and that if he deemed it appropriate, no one would interfere. Moana was enchanted by Jack's respect and sensitivity, and she said to Jack, "I wish everyone were like you." And placing her hand on Jack's shoulder, she began to walk down to where they would eat. Jack had completely disappeared. He began to feel like a bird. His heart felt like it would burst out of his chest. Holding the spot where Moana had touched him, he repeated Moana's words to himself, "I wish everyone were like you," and began laughing to himself like a madman. Just then, Clovis came over and asked him what he was laughing at in a mocking tone. Jack dismissed him, saying something had just occurred to him. Clovis said he thought Jack was trying to get into the king's good graces and that he would be on guard beside him. He also said that if he thought Moana would look at him, he was mistaken, and that the king would not give him his daughter. Jack didn't even listen to these words after Moana's behavior. During dinner, Moana asked her father if she could go sit with Mr. Ricard's daughter Clara that evening, and if he would allow it. King Henry swallowed his bite and said she could certainly go. But he wasn't sure about the security around the castle, so he wanted her to go with horsemen and knights. Moana thanked him and agreed. After eating, Moana went to her room to get ready. As she stood in front of the mirror getting ready, the conversation she had with Jack that morning came to mind. Smiling to herself, she wished she had met Jack under different circumstances, thinking that their current situation would never bring them together. As usual, she chose a simple but elegant dress. Just as she was about to leave the room, the box on the nightstand caught her attention. This box was a memento left by her mother, Anna, and its story always touched Moana's heart deeply. Queen Anna's father, the former King Donald, was an enemy of King Henry's family. That's why Anna and Henry had eloped to get married. Anna's father loved his daughter as much as Henry loved Moana. Anna also loved her father with great affection and respect. However, she couldn't control her heart and chose to run away, knowing she would never be given to the son of the enemy family. While fleeing, she took her father's pocket watch as a memento. Anna wanted to give this watch to Henry instead of keeping it, saying that she would feel safer if he had it. However, Henry did not want to take an item belonging to the enemy family's king. Anna agreed with this decision and kept the watch. When Moana reached a certain age, Anna gave her the watch. She told her that she hadn't been able to find someone worthy of this heirloom, and that if she ever truly loved someone, she should give the watch to that person. She expressed her belief that the person she loved would be someone as respectable as herself, and that she was certain that person would carry this trust most beautifully. Moana took the box in her hands, gazed longingly at the pocket watch inside, and couldn't hold back her tears. But she thought that, like her father, she wasn't worthy of wearing this watch. Then, smiling slightly, she told herself that the person she would love would also be someone respectable, just like her. She closed the box and took it with her. She had decided to give it to Jack. She knew it was impossible, but she still thought that Jack would be the one to carry the watch most beautifully. And as her mother had said, she would give this treasure to him because he was someone she truly loved. He took the box and left the room, going downstairs to board the horse-drawn carriage prepared by King Henry. When he reached the courtyard, he overheard a conversation between the vizier and the knight who would drive the carriage. The vizier said he wanted to take the princess himself, replacing the knight. The knight, however, wanted to ask if the princess had given her permission. Moana approached them and asked what was happening and why there was such a commotion. The knight explained the vizier's request to Princess Moana. Moana told the vizier that he should be at his post and that she had personally obtained permission for this task. The vizier bowed his head in embarrassment, saying he only wanted to help, and apologized. Moana said there was no need for that, boarded the carriage, and they set off. The road was quite dark and foggy, but they eventually arrived safely at Lord Ricard's castle. The knight would wait there until the hour when King Henry's order would bring the princess. Moana headed toward the castle. Meanwhile, the vizier Clovis had gone to where Jack was keeping watch. Jack told the vizier that he wasn't needed, that he could keep watch alone, and that the vizier could rest if he wanted. Clovis hesitated briefly, but said he would stay and keep watch with him. Meanwhile, Moana had gone up to Clara's room and started chatting with her. During the conversation, Jack suddenly came to Moana's mind, and her expression changed instantly. This caught Clara's attention. Clara asked Moana if something was wrong and why her face had changed so suddenly. Moana excitedly began to tell her about her interest in Jack and what she had experienced that day. She became so excited while telling her that it did not escape Clara's notice. Clara realized that Moana was truly in love and said that she had never seen her so excited before. Moana said she wanted it to remain a secret between them. Then she wanted to show Clara the box in her hand. She told the story of the box and said she wanted to give the watch inside to Jack. Clara also expressed how thoughtful Moana was and said she thought it would be better for her to take the first step. The girls got deep into conversation like this, and it was getting quite late. Moana wanted to go home, so she and Clara went down to the castle garden together. But when they got there, what did they see? The knight who had brought Princess Moana was not there. The carriage was standing empty at the gate. They looked around and called out, but there was no sound, no echo. It was as if the knight had vanished into thin air. Clara told Moana not to worry and summoned the knights from their own castle, asking them where the knight who had brought Princess Moana was. At first, the knights hesitated to say anything, unable to speak. Princess Moana was quite nervous and tense as it was getting late. She shouted at the knights in an angry tone, saying she wanted to know what was going on. At Princess Moana's command, one of the knights finally spoke up, saying that the knight who had brought Moana had left the horse-drawn carriage and quickly fled from there. Princess Moana tried to understand what was going on, but it was getting too late to think about it. The knights called King Richard, Princess Clara's father, and waited for his orders after explaining the situation to him. King Richard ordered the knights to leave Princess Moana behind. While the knights prepared the horse-drawn carriage, Clara and Moana waited in a corner. While waiting, Clara told Moana that she was very curious about Jack, and Princess Moana said she wanted her to come with her to the castle. Clara consulted her father and agreed to go with Moana. They set off in the mist and twilight. Princess Clara and Princess Moana laughed and chatted along the way. Moana was very happy and quite excited because she was going to introduce Jack to her. As they approached the castle, they saw Knight Jack and Vizier Clovis standing guard at the gate. Moana described Jack's appearance to Clara, indicating which direction he was in. But Clara wasn't actually focused on Jack at that moment. Her attention had been caught by the Vizier Clovis standing beside him. Moana nudged Clara and asked if she was listening. Clara said she was listening, but she couldn't contain her curiosity and asked Moana who the person beside Knight Jack was. Princess Moana knew her best friend Clara very well, so she immediately understood her state of mind and smiled as she explained that he was the vizier, also mentioning what kind of person he was and that she didn't like him either. Although this didn't matter to Princess Clara, she still listened to Moana while keeping her eyes on the vizier. The knights helped Princess Clara and Princess Moana out of the carriage, and they both walked towards the castle gate. Naturally, Knight Jack and Vizier Clovis had also approached. Both of their hearts were pounding, especially Clara's. Meanwhile, Jack and Clovis, standing at the gate of the guardhouse, were in the same situation. The dialogue between them was not very different. Clovis forgot all his jealousy and, as if he were Jack's closest friend, wondered who the girl next to Princess Moana was and asked Jack about it. Jack, having been speechless the moment he saw Princess Moana, hadn't really listened to Clovis, and besides, he didn't know who she was. The princesses arrived at the door. Vizier Clovis and Knight Jack greeted the princesses with a nod. Moana greeted Jack warmly, trying to hide the box in her hand. While Moana and Jack were chatting briefly, a shy yet excited and passionate glance passed between Princess Clara and Vizier Clovis. Knight Jack had forgotten everything in front of Princess Moana, lost in her brown eyes and almost forgetting he was in the castle. Suddenly snapping back to reality, he glanced at Vizier Clovis and saw that he was looking at Princess Clara just as intently as he was. He reached back and nudged him with his hand, and Vizier Clovis also snapped back to reality like Jack. Meanwhile, Princess Moana, who was in the carriage, remembered Princess Clara's situation and turned to her. He caught Clara looking at Clovis with admiration and, just like Jack had done, touched Clara's waist and nudged her. Clara came to her senses and wished Jack and Clovis good luck. But only Clovis thanked her. Moana and Jack turned their backs and laughed quietly. Jack, being respectful and optimistic, thanked Clovis too, so Clovis wouldn't feel embarrassed. Then Jack noticed the horse-drawn carriage at the door that didn't belong to them. He hadn't seen what kind of carriage they had arrived in. He asked Princess Moana about this. Princess Moana explained what had happened at Ricard's castle. Jack was extremely angry. What if something had happened to Moana? Naturally, he couldn't control his anger and rage. This didn't escape Clovis's notice. He immediately understood the situation and, pretending to be angry to get into Princess Moana's good graces, said how such a thing was possible. Moana, with her usual sharpness, immediately noticed Clovis's irritation at this lie and pretended not to understand, turning to Clara to thank her and say she hoped to see her again soon, then seeing her off. Clovis watched Clara walk toward the horse-drawn carriage until she was out of sight. Princess Moana and Jack noticed this and smiled at each other. Jack stared at Moana's crinkled eyes and sweet smile. Jack tried to distract Clovis by giving him a little warning. His attention distracted, Clovis immediately reverted to his jealous and resentful mode, not hesitating to point out that it was absurd and forbidden to behave this way toward the king's daughter. Jack became thoroughly annoyed with Clovis, and his face flushed and embarrassed, apologized to Princess Moana so she wouldn't misunderstand. He said that to change the subject and warn her the knight's escape must not reach King Henry's ears, because the king would be very angry about this situation and would have doubts about security. This should not happen. Princess Moana, on the contrary, thought her father should know what happened and said she would explain it calmly herself. Vizier Clovis and Knight Jack bowed their heads, accepting their orders. Moana smiled and headed for the gate to enter the castle. Jack forgot all his innocence and purity of heart and was very angry with Clovis because he had embarrassed him in front of Princess Moana. He continued his watch with a frown on his face. Clovis noticed this and enjoyed the situation. A deep silence fell as they both stood at their posts. Just then, an arrow struck the wall of the guard tower. Both men grabbed their swords and took cover. Trusting his courage, Jack grabbed a torch and began advancing toward the direction the arrow had come from. As he went, the piece of paper on the arrow caught Vizier Clovis's attention. Clovis quickly took it, opened it, and began to read. As Jack returned without finding any trace, the daffodil flower revealed by the torchlight caught his attention. All the castle folk and knights knew the meaning of the daffodil, but this flower was not planted in the ground. It seemed to have been deliberately thrown there, and it was in the direction from which the arrow had come. Jack picked up the flower and stared at it for a long time. Only the knights in the castle knew the meaning of this flower. Thanks to his intelligence and attentiveness, he immediately realized that it had been thrown by someone who knew the history of the arrow. He quickly took the flower and returned to his guard post. Clovis had read the paper by then. Jack ran over and explained the situation. They were both stunned. The paper read, "This is only a warning. The second will come at dawn." Realizing the seriousness of the situation, they needed extra swords and shields to strengthen their defenses, but one of them had to stay at the watchpost. Because the king trusted only the two of them, calling another knight would be breaking the king's word. Clovis, with his cunning plan in mind, told Jack to go. No matter how angry Jack was, he never disobeyed the vizier, so he left his guard post to get a sword and shield. Clovis's plan was this. He would place a knight at the guard post, then go to King Henry. He would lock the room where Jack kept the materials for his shelter, go before the king, and say that he was standing alone at the guard post, that Jack had left, and that the arrow had been shot at that very moment. He would also claim that he had found the daffodil. He thought this would win him favor with the king. He took the shot arrow and the daffodil and walked toward the castle by torchlight. He told a knight at the top of the stairs that he needed to stand guard at the gate and send him away. Then he headed for the room where he would lock Jack in. Jack turned his back to look for his shield, and Clovis quickly closed and locked the door. Jack, not understanding what was happening, turned toward the door. He tried to open it, but realized it was locked. Clovis, enjoying this, went to King Henry's room. He knocked on the door to ask for permission, but there was no response from inside. He knocked again, and when he still got no answer, he opened the door. No one was inside. Thinking the king was in his planning room, he headed there. Meanwhile, King Henry was with Princess Moana. Moana had come to her father's room to tell him about the evening's events. She calmly recounted what had happened. King Henry didn't show his anger to his daughter, but he was very upset. Moana felt very important in this situation. She put on her steel armor over her dress. They walked together to the guard post. Meanwhile, King Henry had gone to the guard post because he felt uneasy about the incident Princess Moana had told him about. Clovis was still searching for the king. The size of the castle made his search difficult, and he had lost quite a bit of time. Dawn was also approaching. When King Henry arrived at the guard post, he saw a knight who had fallen asleep there. Yes, the knight Clovis had assigned had fallen asleep at the guard post. While King Henry tried to understand what had happened, he also questioned how Jack and Clovis had allowed such a thing to happen. Angrily, he decided to return to the castle and look for them. Just then, Jack and Moana arrived at the guard post. King Henry asked what had happened in an angry tone. Jack was very embarrassed. The king's daughter was with him, and he wasn't at his post. He immediately began to explain what had happened. When King Henry heard about the arrow and the daffodil, he became very uneasy. He asked where Clovis was. Jack said he was at his post. When the king said a knight was sleeping there, they all rushed to the guard post. As they approached the walls, they heard a sound. Jack immediately took cover in front of King Henry and Princess Moana. He listened carefully to his surroundings. King Henry said there was nothing and asked Jack to stay outside while Moana went into the castle. He would go into the guard post, wake the knight, and ask where Clovis was. The king went inside. As Moana was about to go upstairs, she noticed the steel armor on him and turned back to give it to Jack. Just as she was about to return to Jack, an arrow flew from ahead into the empty space in the castle garden. Realizing dawn had come, Jack instantly shielded Princess Moana. The moment he shielded her, an arrow pierced Jack's leg, and he collapsed to the ground. Moana was shocked and began to scream. Hearing the commotion, King Henry and the knight he had awakened rushed outside. Moana had screamed so loudly that the entire castle sprang to its feet. The knights descended with their shields and swords. Clovis was among them. Clovis froze when he saw the scene below. He immediately ordered the knights to find out where the arrow had come from and sent soldiers in that direction. As the knights went to prevent the attack, Jack lay on the ground, his leg wounded. Moana had taken him in her arms, crying. King Henry ordered them to call the castle doctor and take Jack to the observation room. The doctor came with a stretcher and took Jack to the observation room. Princess Moana followed behind them. Meanwhile, King Henry saw the daffodil and the paper in Clovis's hand and asked him what had happened. Clovis, under the influence of tension and guilt, confessed everything he had done. King Henry was furious. It was unacceptable for his vizier to do such a thing, to disregard him and lock up a knight. In anger, he took the daffodil and the paper from his hand and ordered Clovis to go after the knights. Clovis bowed his head and walked away. When King Henry entered the observation room, Moana was sitting on a chair, crying and blaming herself. Moana ran and hugged her father when she saw him. Jack was lying unconscious under the effect of the medicine he had been given. The arrow stuck in his leg had been removed, and his condition was beginning to improve. Moana pulled her father toward the door, wanting to talk to him. King Henry calmed his daughter and asked what had happened at the guard post. Moana said Jack had saved her. As she said this, she noticed the flower and note in her father's hand. She asked what they were. King Henry sighed and explained what had happened. Moana became very angry with Clovis and told her father to throw him out of the castle. King Henry told his daughter to calm down, that he was a just king and wanted to hear Jack's opinion before making a decision. Moana took the narcissus from her father's hand, smelled it, and began to cry. She said she missed her mother very much. King Henry comforted her by hugging her. Meanwhile, Jack had woken up and heard the conversation. Learning that Clovis had locked him up upset him greatly. Although his pain prevented him from fully expressing his anger, he felt he did not deserve such betrayal. When the king and princess entered, they noticed Jack was awake. The king motioned for him to lie down. Moana and King Henry asked how he was. Jack said he was fine and asked them not to worry. He then asked what decision the king would make about Clovis's actions. King Henry said he wanted to leave that decision to Jack in the interest of fairness. Jack stated that he trusted the king's justice and would respect any decision he made. However, King Henry delegated this decision to Princess Moana because he had saved his daughter and acted honorably. He ordered that Jack be informed of the decision once he had recovered. Moana and King Henry left the room, offering their well wishes. Meanwhile, the knights and Clovis had reached the place where the arrow had come from. Before them stood an army of about 15 men. Just as King Henry's knights were about to attack, Vizier Clovis saw King Donald standing in the rear in a horse-drawn carriage. He ordered the knights to stop. Although the knights looked on in astonishment at what was happening, they did not disobey Vizier Clovis's order and drew their swords. Clovis asked King Donald in a stern and authoritative tone why he was here and what he was trying to do. Donald, maintaining his composure, asked if the message he had sent had been understood. Clovis couldn't quite grasp what was happening at first, but he began to rack his brains. Just then, he noticed the knight standing among the knights who had taken Moana to Plara's house. At that moment, everything fell into place. He himself had explained the meaning of the daffodil to King Donald at the time, so the flower and note sent were no coincidence. It was a clear challenge. Clovis's anger grew instantly. How could such an attack be made on the castle where his granddaughter was? What kind of cruelty was this? However, King Donald was not a ruler known for his mercy. His sole purpose was to take revenge on King Henry for kidnapping his daughter. Overcome by anger, Clovis ordered his knights to attack. When the battle began, chaos quickly ensued. King Donald tried to escape in his horse-drawn carriage, accompanied by a few knights who were protecting him. However, Vizier Clovis noticed this and pursued them with 2 of his knights. Donald fell into the trap King Henry had prepared for every eventuality. The horses were wounded. Escape was no longer possible. Clovis arrived at the scene and had Donald taken to his own carriage, setting off for the castle. As always, the victors of the battle were King Henry's knights. After the victory, they also returned to the castle. Meanwhile, Princess Moana and King Henry were waiting in the castle courtyard. Henry was extremely calm. He was confident of victory. Moana, however, was tired and bored. She went to her room to rest. As she lay down on her bed, she noticed the small box under her pillow. She stared at it for a long time. Finally, she made her decision. The moment she saved him came to mind. Taking the box, she went to the observation room where Jack was. She asked the doctor for permission and sat down in the chair at Jack's bedside. She opened the box. She took out an old clock. He stared at the watch with a dazed look and began to tell Jack the story of the watch. His voice was trembling. His eyes were filled with tears. Jack was both sad and deeply moved. He tried not to look into his eyes, but he found it difficult to avert his gaze. Moana finally got to what he really wanted to say. He said he wanted to give him the watch. Jack was stunned. He was also happy. But he said he couldn't accept it, and that King Henry wouldn't allow it either. Moana was determined. She said her father would grant her every wish and that this was her own decision. She held out the watch to Jack. Jack shyly took the watch. "Thank you," he said slowly. There was a long silence between them, and that silence was broken by 2 words that fell from Jack's lips. "I love you." He didn't even know how he said it. His face flushed, and he looked away. Moana wiped her tears and looked at him, and with a trembling voice, she could only say, "Me too." After a long gaze, Moana took a deep breath and made a bold request to Jack. "I want you to ask my father for my hand," she said resolutely. Jack froze. He thought it was impossible. But Moana had a plan in mind. She knew that Clara loved Clovis, and that Clovis was not indifferent to her. She had also learned that King Henry wanted Jack to determine Clovis's punishment. According to Moana's plan, she would tell Clovis that Clara loved him, but she would set a condition. If he accepted Jack's decision without hesitation in the king's presence, showed his respect openly, and submitted to justice, she would reveal that Clara loved him too. Then, when King Henry asked Jack for the punishment, Jack would say that everyone makes mistakes, that Clovis had acted in anger at that moment, and asked for his pardon. In return for this fair approach, he would dare to ask for Moana. Although Jack didn't find the plan entirely logical, he decided to try it because he truly loved Moana. Just then, the soldiers returned to the castle. King Henry welcomed them proudly and then went to the observation room where Jack was, taking the vizier Clovis with him. Moana was there too. Henry noticed the watch in Jack's hand and asked what it was. Before Jack could speak, Moana told the story of the watch. Henry felt a momentary flash of anger, but he didn't show it in front of his daughter. He understood more or less why the watch had been given to Jack. Then he asked about Clovis being brought in and what Jack's decision was. Jack explained Moana's plan and her desire for forgiveness. Henry froze for a moment. Actually, he wasn't completely opposed to this decision because Moana's happiness was everything to him, and he trusted Jack. After a brief silence, he accepted the decision. Jack was stunned. They didn't even need to ask Clovis. He was already filled with remorse. And so, the matter was settled. Moana hugged her father, and Henry pressed her to his chest, saying, "My beautiful girl." Time passed, wounds healed, and finally, the day came to ask for Moana's hand. A magnificent ceremony was prepared in the castle's grandest hall. King Henry, while giving his daughter to Jack, asked him for one promise: to never hurt Moana and to cherish her for the rest of his life. Jack promised without hesitation. Clara was also at the ceremony. She and Clovis were exchanging glances in a corner. After the proposal, Moana and Jack went over to them and told them everything. Clara and Clovis confessed their feelings for each other. They were both surprised, but happy. The ice between Clovis and Jack melted completely. Shortly after, King Henry decided to hold a magnificent wedding. It would be the most unforgettable wedding in these lands. And finally, the morning of the wedding arrived. Moana was excited. She was getting ready with Clara. She had chosen an elegant, simple, but dazzling dress. While Jack was getting ready, Clovis came to his room, apologized for the past, and said he wished him happiness. They hugged and made peace. At that moment, King Henry entered Moana's room. He asked Clara for permission to be alone. He hugged his daughter, unable to hide his emotions. Moana hugged her father, saying she wished her mother could be with them that day. Henry took his daughter by the arm and led her down to the castle garden. When Jack saw Moana, he was utterly enchanted. She was already beautiful, but in her wedding dress, she looked completely different. The wedding ceremony took place. Cheers rose up. Their loved ones were by their side. And now, everyone was truly happy.